10.24 years. Write that number down, because by the end of this video, it's going to matter more than any dollar amount I mention. Two people start investing on the same day. One puts in $200 a month. The other puts in $2,000, 10 times more. Same fund, same 7% average return. Ask most people which one hits their crossover point, the day the market starts earning them more than they're personally contributing. And nearly everyone gives the same wrong answer. The person saving more gets there faster. They don't. Both of them cross over on the exact same day. Not close. The exact same day, down to the decimal. Here's the part that should genuinely bother you. If you've ever assumed you're too far behind to catch up because you can't save as much as someone else, this video is about to prove that assumption wrong. Using math, you can check yourself in about 90 seconds. This works whether you're saving $50 a month or $5,000. The rate is universal. Only the ending balance changes. By the time this is over, you'll know exactly which one of those two levers you've been mistaking for the other. My name's Nick. I spend way too much time running numbers most people assume don't need running. Today, why contribution size and crossover timing have almost nothing to do with each other, and what that actually means for how you save. I'm not here to tell you to save more or save less. I'm here to make sure you understand what each dollar is actually buying you. Because right now, most people have that backwards. Everyone assumes more money in means a faster finish line. It's the most reasonable assumption in personal finance. It's also wrong, and the reason why is a piece of math almost nobody bothers to show. This assumption isn't stupid, it's just imported from the wrong domain, and nobody ever corrected it. Every financial calculator you've ever used reinforces it too. Plug in a bigger number, the projected outcome graph looks steeper, feels faster. It isn't measuring the same thing you think it's measuring. Here's the mechanism. Call them Person A and Person B. Person A invests $200 a month, $2,400 a year. Person B invests $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year, 10 times more. Both average 7% a year, hands off, no timing tricks. The crossover point. The day the market's return in a year finally outpaces that year's contribution depends on exactly one thing: how long it takes money to double at that return rate. Not the contribution, just the rate. At 7%, that's 10.24 years, every time, for both of them. Here's why the rate alone decides it. The crossover happens the moment a year's return equals a year's contribution. Return in a year is the balance times the rate. Set that equal to the contribution, and the contribution cancels out of the equation entirely. What's left is just the rate, deciding how long it takes a single dollar to double. That's the whole proof, and it doesn't care what the contribution was to begin with. 10 times the money in. 0 extra days to the crossover. The finish line for win never moved. Here's what did move. Person A crosses over with $34,286 in the account, about $24,576 of that their own money, roughly $9,710 of it the market's. Person B crosses over with $34,242,857 summons, $245,760 their own, about $97,097 the market's, same day, 10 times the balance, 10 times the market's contribution too, in the exact same proportion. Read that again. Not the timing, the size. That's the only thing contributing more actually buys at the crossover point. A bigger number on the same date, not an earlier date. You'd assume this means contribution amount barely matters. It's the opposite. It's the only thing that determines how big the eventual snowball gets. Timing was never the lever contribution controlled in the first place. Add a third person to make the pattern impossible to miss. Person C invests $500 a month, $6,000 a year. Their crossover balance, $85,714. Their crossover date, 10.24 years. 3 completely different incomes, 3 completely different balances, 1 identical date. So why does almost everyone assume the higher contribution wins the timing race? Because in almost every other area of life, more effort means a faster result. Work more hours, get paid sooner, run more miles, finish the race quicker. The brain applies that same logic to investing by default, and here for once, it's simply the wrong model. Here's the part that should genuinely bother you. This misconception has a real cost. Someone who can only afford $200 a month often assumes the entire concept of a crossover is for people with bigger paychecks. that compounding out-earning contributions is out of reach for them specifically. It isn't. They hit the identical milestone on the identical timeline as someone contributing 10 times more. Nobody tells them that, so a lot of them quietly stop around year 6 or 7, convinced the math doesn't apply to people like them. That's the real damage, not a smaller number. A canceled subscription to their own future, right around the point where the math was about to start proving them right. Data on 401k participation consistently shows the same pattern. People who start small and feel like they're not investing enough to matter contribute inconsistently, pausing during tight months, restarting during flush ones. Every pause resets part of that decade-plus clock. It's not the $200 that's the problem, it's stopping. There's a second version of this same mistake, going the other direction. Someone contributing $2,000 a month sometimes assumes they've basically solved investing, that the crossover is right around the corner because the balance looks so much bigger, so much faster. It isn't right around the corner. It's still 10.24 years out, same as everyone else's, no matter how impressive the balance looks along the way. Now, before you assume this means the amount doesn't matter at all, it matters enormously, just not for the question everyone's been asking. Here's the actual lever. Nick McGeely, who spent years analyzing exactly this kind of data, makes the point plainly in Just Keep Buying. Consistency beats timing. An amount compounds the same way rate does, just on a different axis. The rate decides when, the amount decides how big. Two completely separate levers, and almost every personal finance conversation collapses them into one. McGeely's own research on this backs it up with data, not just intuition. Across decades of market history, investors who simply kept contributing on schedule, through crashes, through recoveries, through boring flat years, ended up ahead of investors who tried to time when to put money in, more often than the reverse. The lesson isn't complicated, it's just unsatisfying, because it doesn't reward cleverness. It rewards showing up, which means the actual decision isn't can I afford to hit my crossover point sooner. You can't buy an earlier crossover with a bigger check. The calendar doesn't move for anyone at a given return rate. The actual decision is how large do I want the number to be on the day it arrives. And that's worth deciding deliberately, instead of assuming a bigger contribution buys a shortcut it was never capable of buying. This also explains something that confuses a lot of people about milestone videos, including some this channel has made. A fixed dollar figure, like $650,000 is when the machine takes over, is only ever true for one specific contribution amount. Change the contribution, and the milestone dollar figure changes with it, even though the underlying timing math stays fixed. The date is the universal fact. The dollar figure was always personal. Remember that person from a few minutes ago, the one who assumed the crossover wasn't for people saving $200 a month, and quietly stopped around year 6? Here's what changes once the actual math is in front of them. $200 a month, at year 6, has crossed about $17,000. Still years from the crossover, still mostly their own money in that balance. It looks unremarkable. It looks like nothing is happening. But the clock underneath it is running on exactly the same schedule as anyone else's, at the same rate. The only thing standing between them and their own 34,286 crossover moment is 4.24 more years of not stopping. The same math works in reverse for anyone who feels like they started too late. Nothing about the 10.24-year clock cares what year you started it. It only cares that you started it and that you didn't stop it. So, 10.24 years. Write it down like I asked at the start. Two people, 10 times apart in what they contribute, arriving at the identical finish line on the identical day, carrying completely different amounts of money across it. The date was never negotiable. It was fixed the moment they picked a return rate and left it alone. The only real decision either of them ever made was how much to carry across the line when it finally arrived. Somewhere, right now, there's a version of person A and a version of person B, on completely different incomes, living completely different lives, both quietly walking toward the same date without knowing it. The calendar was never for sale, only the size of what shows up on it was. Quick, honest note, YouTube shows this channel to people it thinks will actually watch, and it mostly decides that by who watches to the end and who comes back. So if this rearranged something for you, staying to the end and coming back next time does more than any comment, though I read every comment too. Run your own numbers. Your monthly contribution times 12, divided by 0.07, That's your crossover balance. Then check how many years you've actually been contributing. Tell me in the comments how close you are. And if the number surprises you either way, too far off or closer than you expected, that's exactly the reaction this video was built to cause. Most people have never run it once. I'll see you in the next one.